We got John Scalzi, fantastic sci-fi author, drinking a Coke Zero with us on Inverse Happy Hour. I've got a little bit of bourbon here.
Right.
And John just released a new book called The Last Emperox,
Yeah.
which is the final book in a trilogy of one of the many, many books he's written. So to start, I just wanted to ask about this. Tell us a little bit about this book. We're gonna do an exclusive reading, but first we're gonna take some questions, talk about the book, talk about writing.
Sure.
So tell us about this new book you just published.
Okay, well, the book is called The Last Emperox. It's the third book in a series that's called the Interdependency series. And basically the concept of it is there is a galaxy-spanning human civilization, and the way you get from one star system to the next is a natural feature of the universe that's called the flow. We don't know how the flow works, we just know that it works, so we've been using it. As the story begins, the flow is shifting, kind of like how a river will sometimes shift its track. And when that happens, what this means is that all the systems are going to be isolated. Now, there are some people who are saying, just so you know, this is a thing that's happening and maybe we should prepare for it.
Yeah.
Then other people are like, well, but do we have to? Can't we wait? Shouldn't this be somebody else's problem? As we go through the books, we basically follow three main characters as they try to convince people that change is coming and they have to deal with it, and also hopefully save as many people as possible before the flow entirely collapses and people are isolated in their systems. So in between all of this, there's also lots of politics, lots of personality conflicts, some explosions, some lasers, spaceships,
Nice.
you know, all the good stuff.
All the hits.
All the hits.
Sounds great. I have plenty more questions, but if you're just joining us, we're talking with John Scalzi on Inverse Happy Hour. Please submit your questions in the comments, and I will relay them to him as best as I can. Ask him about his books, life, writing sci-fi. So it sounds like, to me, it sounds like there's a few different metaphors going on here, whether that's climate change or the collapse of a great empire.
Yeah.
What inspired this story for you?
Well, weirdly enough, it had absolutely nothing to do with anything current. When you're a science fiction author, you kind of take weird ideas from wherever and try to bring them up into the future. And one day, and it was about 2014, I was thinking about what would have happened to the European age of exploration, which was roughly from the 14th century to the 17th and 18th century, if ocean currents and ocean trade winds had just stopped. They wouldn't have been able to get to the New World. The New World would have been safe from Europe, and how would have history been different? And so that was the initiating sort of thing that I was thinking about. But the funny thing is if you're thinking about ocean currents, you're thinking about climate. You know, if you're thinking about climate, you're going to have a thought that is relevant for today's time. And the more I wrote this particular series, the more sort of reality caught up to what I was doing. And so in many ways, I didn't mean to write something that was relevant to 21st century United States or 21st century world. But it turns out that that's what I ended up doing, and I apologize for that because my universe is a terrible place to live in.
Well, that's all right. It sounds like an interesting one. We've got a few questions from the audience, and again, send us your questions. John Scalzi is here to answer them and talk about sci-fi. We have a question, which is, what was the first sci-fi story you ever wrote, and how did you start writing it?
Wow. I think the first science fiction story I ever wrote was when I was like 14 years old, and it was a story that I wrote, and it was a terrible story, and I remember the name of it. It was called Satan, which was the name of my friend Natasha's name backwards. And it was just, I can't remember too many of the details, either that or I blocked them from my brain. But it really was one of those things of somebody comes from the stars, they've landed as part of this, sort of prehistoric civilization, and eventually they go back to the stars, having lived among the humans for a while. It's about as good as you would think a story from a 14-year-old is, right?
Okay.
But I have fond memories of it because, one, my friend Natasha liked it because it had her name backwards in it. And then the other thing was, you know, as a 14-year-old, the impressive thing is not that you were writing good stories, but that you were writing it all. And at that point, I was writing, you know, that. I wrote some more science fiction, more stories. I wrote some humor stories, so on and so forth. I was in high school the kid who did a lot of stories in which, you know, shoved them in front of people saying, here, read this. Tell me what you think. Which is why every single person that I went to high school with is excused from reading anything that I write now because they had to deal with me at my worst.
That's fair. Well,
Yeah.
well, they're missing out, I guess. But here's another one from Nick James who says, do you have any advice on how to get a script into the right hands?
I mean, that's kind of what are the right hands? If you know, the thing is that when you have a script idea or you have a novel idea or something like that, and somebody wants to make a movie out of it, does that mean that you want to get it to a producer who then has to go to a studio? Do you want to give it to the studio who then has to give it to a producer or a director in order to write it? Basically, no matter who you give it to, there's going to have to be like 6 or 7 other people who agree that this is something that they all want to do before you even get to the point where they can even think about making a TV show or a movie out of it. You know, so the best advice that I can give people is to write a script that you like, and then probably the best people to try to get at that point is either an agent or a manager, because they already know all the people who that you would want to give it to, and also because they are an agent, they will also know the correct way to do it. You know, everybody has this thing where, you know, someone will shove a script underneath the bathroom stall, right? Don't ever do that. Don't do that. Don't walk up to somebody and say, here's my script, or can we collaborate on this, or something like that. The intake process is there for a reason. So try to get an agent first. I mean, that would be the first person to do it from. That would be my suggestion.
Makes sense. There you go. Here's a question I like from someone whose name I think is Timmy. He says, Will Whedon does an awesome job narrating this series in the audiobooks. Yeah. Did you give him any notes on delivering lines or character personalities, or was that just all Will Whedon?
I don't give him very many notes about his particular performance, and the reason for that is that he is a professional actor who has been doing this thing for like 3 decades now, you know, and so I have confidence that he actually knows what he's doing. He's a friend of mine, and so what he will do is if he has like a pronunciation question, right? Especially for science fiction, that makes sense that you might have that.
Yeah.
He will text me or call me and go, dude, how do I pronounce this word? And I will tell him how to do that. But otherwise, I pretty much leave him alone. It is fun, though. I will say this. It is fun because he is a friend of mine, that while he's reading it, every once in a while, he'll text me something about the book because he's reading it usually only the first or second time while he's performing it, right? Yeah. So he's like, dude, I just read this chapter. This chapter was amazing. Dude, I can't believe what just happened here. You know, so he's a good early indication of how other people are going to react. So and he does such a good job of narrating. So it's fun listening to him or hearing him react to the thing that he's going to be reading, because how he's going to react is hopefully how you guys are going to react a little bit further down the line.
It's a pretty good person to have as your test audience. Well,
right.
Yeah,
right.
Not bad. Here's another one from a few people, including username Viking in the Sky wants to know, do you have any pre-writing rituals?
Yeah, about 4 weeks of Twitter.
Yeah, I guess same here.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the thing. The hardest thing for me to do is actually start writing. And then there have been times where I've just been so like, I guess I got to get started. But wait, I can get into this argument on social media instead. That feels like work. So these days, because I have a really long book contract and I actually do have to put out the books on a schedule. What I end up doing is my pre-writing schedule is turning on the Freedom app. It's an app that like blocks all your social media.
Okay.
And then when that happens, I can't read Twitter, I can't read Facebook, I can't go on to Reddit, I can't go on the news sites. There's really nothing I can do except write, right? And I hate that I am the person who needs an app to babysit me so that I don't get distracted. But guess what? I'm that person. So
Yeah.
that's my pre-writing ritual is banishing social media and news until from 8 o'clock in the morning until noon. And then after that, then I can answer email, then I can watch news and find out what terrible things happen. Then I can argue with people on the internet.
Nice. Yeah. Social media is terrible, but also great.
Right.
Here's another question, and please, if you're just tuning in, send your questions to John Scalzi, and
Sure.
we'll answer them on Inverse Happy Hour. Joe Pa says, you use vulgarities very well. It accents the story and gives your characters character. Is that something you think about, or does it just become part of the character you're writing?
I do think about it and whether or not it's that character would use that profanity and how they would use it. I mean, for example, in the Interdependency books, obviously Kiva is a character. Kiva Lagos is a character who is sort of masterful at her profanity. But Mars Claremont and Cardinia, who is the Emperor, neither of them use a whole lot of profanity. They will use it every once in a while, but it's not just part of their everyday language. And because it's not really part of their everyday language, if all of a sudden they were to curse a blue streak, that would be something that you would really notice. And why isn't it part of their character? It's not part of their character just because, some people don't swear a whole lot. And these are the people who don't.
Yeah.
Now, in the case with Kiva, who is, doing a master class on how to be profane, that is, not only is it part of her character, but it is part of how she negotiates the world, right? And she uses it partly as a shield. She uses it partly as a sword. She does all sorts of things with it that really sort of unveil her character. So there is a lot of thought, into what profanity gets used and by whom and how much. And I don't sit there and chart it out. I do what feels natural with a particular character, but some people are going to swear a lot. Some people are not. I mean, in my real life, I swear a hell of a lot, but I don't tend to do it when I'm doing, for example, public events.
Well, if you want to, you're welcome to swear on this show.
Oh, well, thank you. But, but you see what I'm saying. It's sort of like, if you hear me swearing a lot, it's because I'm basically, I'm off the clock and I'll be like, shit, motherfucker, shit, left and right. But when I'm doing what I'm doing now, I keep it clean for the kids.
That's good. That's good to hear. All right, we're going to get to the reading soon, which I'm excited for, but let's take a few more questions with John Scalzi on Inverse Happy Hour. This one I love, it's really specific, and I'm not sure how to say it, but someone wants to know, why is the pluralization of Emperox spelled at the end with an OXS and not OXES?
Because I didn't think about it.
There you go.
I mean, let's go ahead and be honest here. No, and also the thing is that we should all understand that the language that they're using 1,500 years in the future, which is when this thing is supposed to be happening, is not English, right? It is not exactly the language that we are using right now. And therefore, specific translations are going to be a little squidgy anyway. And so what's important for me is using language in a way that is going to work for a contemporary audience rather than trying to create a whole set of grammar and everything else that is not, that will take a while for people to get used to. Now, there are some people who really do that, who really get into how the language is used and what are the tenses and all this sort of stuff. And that's great. And if you want to do that as a writer, and if that's the thing you dig as a reader, that's great. But for me, I just want people to get into the story. So for me, I deviate from basically language as we use it when I have a specific reason to do it. And then other than that, I don't tend to overthink it too much because, like I said, I just want people to dive in. And that's basically the sort of writer I am anyway. I'm using language as a vehicle to tell a story as opposed to using a story in order to show how I use the language. And neither is right and neither is wrong. That's just different modes of storytelling. But I definitely favor one mode over the other.
I have a question for you. A lot of your books discuss the idea or take place in worlds where humanity has moved beyond Earth, which is something that people like Elon Musk are sort of talking about a lot these days. What do you think about Elon Musk and people like him who are very focused on this concept right now?
The thing about us leaving Earth is all very nice, but there's no other planet that is as good for us as Earth is, and it's going to be much, much harder to terraform Mars or Venus or Europa or any other moon or planet that you might care to name than it would be just to simply take care of the planet that we actually have. It's going to be a lot cheaper to take care of this planet than to take a large number of people to the stars, which is the thing. No matter what, the vast majority of people on Earth are going to stay on Earth. Space travel, and I don't mean this in a terrible sort of way, but it is absolutely true. Space travel is elitist. Space travel is for the very few. Right now, because of the way that we do it through public funding, it's for astronauts, but astronauts tend to be super competent. They all have masters. Yeah. They're all like disgustingly fit physical specimens. They are, exemplars of the human thing. So they're the people who get to go to the stars first. Who are the people who get to go after those people? The billionaires or the millionaires, right? Yeah. It's inherently elitist to get people to the stars. So when people talk about, we need to go to the stars because that's going to save humanity, not really. No, I mean, what's going to save humanity, though, on a large scale, is not screwing up this planet that we have. I mean, It's so much easier. It's so much cheaper. We could live in a better way than we do, or in a way that has less of an impact, ecologically than we do. But we just choose not to because in the short term, there's money to be made, and in the short term, it's a lot of effort, and we don't want to do it. So everybody is like, well, we're going to have to go to space in order to save ourselves. It's like, you're not going to space. You are not going to space. Elon Musk might go to space, but you are not. You are going to die here in the filth. So, so maybe rather than, no offense to Elon Musk, who is a smart guy, but maybe rather than cheering him on with the space exploration exclusively, maybe do a 50-50 of yay, go space exploration, because I'm for space exploration, but maybe yay space exploration and yay not fucking up planet Earth. Maybe give them both equal time, because I'm 50 years old. I'm not going to the stars. I'm going to stay here. I would like it not to turn into a pile of crap.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Here's another question, and we're going to get to the reading in one or two more questions, but I think you're really on a roll, so let's keep going.
Let's do it.
So from Mr. Ruth Yunjay says, do you discuss some of your plots with physicists or other scientists before or after you are writing the stories?
To the extent that I have friends who are physicists and other scientists, yes. But otherwise, not usually. I used to, as a professional matter, write a lot about science. I have a book of astronomy, The Rough Guide to the Universe, which has went into a couple of printings. I used to write science articles. I'm not unfamiliar with science. And most of the time, when I talk about the deeply speculative stuff, it is usually speculative enough that talking to physicists would result in them going, yeah, I mean, I guess that could happen.
Sure.
I mean, the thing that I like to say is I like to get the science that we know as correct as possible. That way, when I extrapolate out to something else, it's more believable. But
Yeah.
the other thing is, I really strongly believe there's not too much value in trying to over-explain my science in my universe, because even if I rely on a physicist for the fiddly details and stuff like that, eventually I'm the one who's writing. And eventually I'm going to screw up, and eventually some nerd is going to be, you messed that up. And why did you mess it up? Are you a bad writer or what? And that being the case, if I leave it vague enough, that guy who's going to like tell me I'm wrong will actually figure it out in his own brain how that would work. So I will get people who come to my events and be like, I know how you did this. This is what you were thinking of. And then they will go off on a tear and tell me something I didn't know, but sure, sounds great. And I'll be like, wow, you nailed that. That's great. So honestly, you give enough detail that it sounds like you know what you're talking about, but not enough detail where they can find out that you don't. And you get a lot of credit that way. And then they'll fill in all the gaps for themselves in order to make it seem reasonable to them. So that's what
great
I do.
advice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for answering all those questions. Thank you, everyone, for asking those questions. Now we're going to do a really special reading from the new book, Last Emperox. So I don't know if we talked a bit about the story at the beginning, but if you want to give us like a bit of a setup for what you're about to read, and then
Sure.
Go for it.
Like I said, when we're talking about the things that are going on in the book, usually the main characters are people at the high levels of society. And so the part that I'm reading is what are the common people doing during this time where the universe looks like it's, or the empire looks like it's going to collapse. How are they dealing with it on a day-to-day basis? And the section that I'm reading talks a little bit about how they're dealing with the day-to-day aspects of getting through their life when we're being told the world may change.
Sounds great. Let's do it.
Okay.
While the elite of the Interdependency were making their plans to abandon the common people to their fate, the common people of the Interdependency were beginning to come to grips with what exactly that fate actually was. It should be noted that the common people of the Interdependency were not fools. They were arguably the most educated and materially comfortable common people ever to live in any human civilization, going back to when the first human decided hoofing themselves across the African landscape was a pain in the ass and decided to stay in one place instead. The population of the Interdependency were not fools largely for two reasons. The first was that the vast majority of the Interdependency's billions of souls lived their lives in either cities hollowed out from the ground of otherwise uninhabitable planets or inside habitats floating in space. In either of these environments, a large population of the uneducated and feral would be a clear and present safety danger to everyone else. The second reason was that the ruling class of the Interdependency, favoring financial and social stability over having the lumpen proletariat trying to rip their heads from their necks at every opportunity, opted to have the Interdependency's baseline standard of living one where no one starved or was without shelter or died of easily preventable diseases or went bankrupt if they had a heart attack or lost a job or both. For these reasons, the Interdependency held no poor or rabble in the ways that elites of previous civilizations would understand the term. This was great if your goal was keeping a large population of humans spread across trillions of kilometers of physical space reasonably content on a day-to-day basis. It was less great if your goal was to, say, leave these billions completely in the dark about the encroaching end of civilization that was likely to result in slow famine and death for each of them if nothing was done. They knew. They knew because scientists analyzing data had come largely from the middle and working classes of the Interdependency, and they shared information and data. They knew because the crews of the ships that plied the flow, who had pledged themselves to the guilds that the noble families controlled, were also from the middle and working classes. They knew because the journalists of the Interdependency were from these classes as well. And they knew because the Emperor Grayland II, who had lived her early life as the child of an academic, had in her wisdom or naivete, or both, decided to let the truth about the imminent collapse of the flow go out to the public. They knew, and they knew reasonably early in the grand scheme of things. But what did they do with this information? A large number of people looked at when their particular system would be entirely cut off from the rest of the interdependency, decided it was enough time in the future that someone would probably figure out what to do, and then went back to their daily lives only mildly more apprehensive than before. The more ambitious planned protests and conferences and composed strongly worded missives to their local system and interdependency ministers of parliament, saying in no uncertain terms that something should be done. That's what they were elected for. And then they, too, mostly went back to their lives under the impression that they, at least, had done something. Another group, which might charitably be called entrepreneurs, or less charitably grifters, saw in the end of the world a business opportunity and begun to target the particularly fearful, anxious, and inconsolable. That went as it usually does. A rather smaller group of people looked at the flow streams that were still open, saw how long it would be before it would be impossible to catch a ship to N from where they were, and started making plans to catch those ships at or near the last possible instant, saving up all the while. This crafty bit of foresight was undercut by the fact that these people generally did not, in fact, make their reservations paid in full the second they thought of it. It meant that when they did get around to it, they would discover that every passenger berth had been reserved years in advance and at exorbitant rates. After all, these days, when a ship went to end, it stayed at end forever. These people had already missed their chance to escape, and they didn't even know it. They likely couldn't have afforded it anyway. All right, so that's your little sneak preview of The Last Emperor. Thank you all, and we'll chat soon.